Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg will take center stage again this morning after 3 weeks since he told Congress his social media company could improve on protecting users' data. The Facebook Developers Conference will host some of Facebook's biggest supporters and critics. The company is still reeling from revelations that Cambridge Analytica improperly obtained the personal data of 87 million Facebook users. John Blackstone has a preview of Zuckerberg's keynote speech.
Mark Zuckerberg's keynote speech at the F8 conference has been used to gloss over bad news. Last year, it was a murder posted on Facebook Live.
Our hearts go out to the family and friends of Robert Godwin Sr.
In the wake of this year's data scandals, he's gone on an extended apology tour and made changes to protect user privacy. But those moves have adversely impacted developers like Eugene Lee.
Without warning, all these changes were made, and they're stuck in limbo right now.
When Facebook put restrictions on thousands of developers following scrutiny by Congress, Lee's company, Channel Meter, lost access to user data that enabled it to measure video usage on Facebook. Advertisers are Facebook's customers.
Correct.
Users are Facebook's product.
Many ways, yes.
Developers
are those who are the glue and the fabric in many ways. What's really propelled Facebook's growth over other platforms was being open to developers. And right now, that behavior isn't the same.
In its 14 years, Facebook has brashly written its own rule. Will Mark Zuckerberg stand there and say, the days of move fast and break things are over?
I don't think so. I think it'll actually be the opposite. I think he'll say, we've certainly had a tough stretch. We're sorry. But, we have a responsibility to keep building the future.
While Zuckerberg is expected to talk of change, it may be hard to convince developers who have everything to lose.
Facebook is doing an incredible disservice to developers because they're inhibiting their future growth.
You've chosen not to attend F8 this year.
Yeah. Instead, we'd rather kind of sit and wait and just sit on the sidelines and see what Zuck has to say.
All right, let's get to Jason Kint. He is the CEO of Digital Content Next. That's a trade organization for digital content companies and online marketers. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Just ahead of the conference, WhatsApp founder Jan Koum announced plans to leave Facebook after problems with the company. Could that news put a damper on this conference, Jason?
I think in many ways it could. It's a reflection of the larger issue for Facebook right now. He probably is one of the most famous developers yet, and he also made, along with his partner and others, about $19 billion off the app he sold to Facebook. And so you've got one of the great heroes of the developer world in Facebook's eyes, who now is leaving the company. And his partner, we shouldn't forget, Brian Acton, was the one who actually started to lead the delete Facebook app craze that went around a couple weeks ago. So this matters.
Google is also working on privacy changes. It has new policies ahead of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. You're one of 4 publisher trade groups that sent a letter to Google, which will be a controller of personal data. Can you explain the role of controller?
The role of controller is ultimately the company who has the most responsibility to the user for how that data is processed. And so the controller is often the app or the website you choose to use. And the problem we saw in Google's approach, which came nearly 2 years after GDPR was announced and just a couple months shy of when it's going to be enforced, is that Google was trying to assert controller status across the entire web and app ecosystem. They want to be able to continue to collect all of the data they collect across every website they touch and use it however they want to use it. And they also want to push down liability on media companies and publishers for what Google does with that data. And that's a problem for publishers globally. And so we sent a letter to the CEO of Google, along with 3 other associations representing more than 4,000 publishers globally, saying that Google needs to stop doing what it's doing, which is protecting its data ecosystem for its own profit, and actually do what the spirit of GDPR is, which is protect the consumer.
Right, because in the letter, it says Google will withhold personal data until publishers get proper consent. What are you worried, and what should people be worried about what Google will do with that data?
They should be worried about what we don't know what Google will do with that data. So Google has never been very clear in what it uses data for, particularly when it collects it across the web. And so it's interesting that Google is being this aggressive. It's one of its more aggressive moves that we've seen in its history in terms of trying to protect getting its hands on more and more data. And it puts itself right in the same exact discussion as Facebook at a very sensitive time. And it also touches on antitrust issues, frankly, because it's using its dominance to try to enforce what it wants across the entire ecosystem.
So let's turn to another privacy story. Alexander Kogan, he harvested Twitter data in 2014 and 2015. He's, of course, the researcher that worked with Cambridge Analytica during the presidential election. What do we know about his work with Twitter?
Well, what we learned yesterday was that he was, and this might not have been illegal, and UK laws are different than US laws, but he was buying a massive amount of data from Twitter. He was licensing the fire hose, we call it, which is the APIs that are set up. You can actually pull in all of the public data that goes through Twitter. And so they were licensing it, and they were using that data for political interests, likely. So they were also licensing data, it appears, from a lot of other data brokers, too, as I've read. So it just touches more and more on the concerns that we have around the ecosystem and how data moves outside of maybe consumers' expectations.
Just fascinating. We'll be watching Jason Kint from Digital Content next. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for having me.